from the garage right now. I live here, also. I'm standing on my own. I didn't ask where you live. We got a call about a disturbance. Get on the ground! Oh, get plied. Last warning, or I will put you down. Stop resisting. I am not resisting. I'm a veteran. I know the drill. That's it. Turn around.
The camera is already recording before anyone speaks. A fixed view of a quiet residential frontage, a driveway, a front lawn. No crowd, no movement suggesting urgency. According to the footage, nothing in the frame indicates an active crime in progress. What the camera does not announce, but the record later confirms, is that the man standing on his own property is a black war veteran. His prior service placed him inside the same legal structure now being applied against him. He was trained to follow lawful commands, to operate within rules of engagement, to defer to authority when properly exercised. That background is not stated on scene. It does not need to be. The irony is structural, not verbal. The officer enters the frame and initiates contact. The footage shows no visible weapon, no trespass, no attempt to flee. The location matters. This is not a roadway. This is not a public disturbance. This is a private residence. From the moment the officer chooses to escalate the encounter beyond conversation, the legal margin narrows. The first decision point appears immediately. The officer elects to assert control rather than disengage. According to constitutional standards later cited in public filings, a lawful arrest requires probable cause. The camera does not record an offense that would satisfy that threshold. From this point, the outcome narrowed. As the interaction continues, the veteran remains within the boundaries of his property. His posture is visible. His movements are slow. He does not advance. He does not attempt to leave. The officer issues commands that presume authority rather than establish justification. Each instruction carries legal weight. Each unchallenged command removes a potential exit. What follows is not sudden, it is procedural. The decision to detain converts the encounter into a seizure. The decision to restrain converts it into an arrest. At no point does the footage show conduct that would later be identified as a lawful trigger. This decision could not be undone. The significance of the arrest is not emotional, it is structural. A man trained under military discipline is subjected to force on his own lawn without a cause articulated on camera. The system he once served now documents itself acting without the safeguards it requires. The final consequence is not announced at the scene. It arrives later, through filings and settlement records. The city would ultimately agree to a $1.1 million payout. No admission of wrongdoing is recorded in the settlement itself. The number stands alone, fixed and irreversible. This incident does not rely on testimony. It relies on footage. What the camera captures, the record must reconcile. And once the sequence is complete, the process moves forward without discretion. The footage establishes legitimacy before it establishes conflict. The veteran remains on his own property. The boundaries are visible. The driveway meets the lawn. The structure of the home frames the encounter. According to the camera, there is no entry into public space and no incursion onto another's property. This matters under Fourth Amendment standards governing seizures. A lawful detention requires reasonable suspicion. A lawful arrest requires probable cause. The video records neither being articulated. The officer's presence persists. The veteran's conduct does not change. He does not brandish an object. He does not make threats. He does not attempt to flee. His hands remain visible for much of the encounter. His voice, when audible, is controlled. The camera captures a static scene that does not evolve into danger. From this point, the legal gap begins to widen. A second decision point follows. The officer chooses to continue questioning rather than disengage. The decision removes a lawful exit. Without new information, the justification cannot strengthen. The outcome narrowed. The veteran states he is at home. The statement aligns with the visible evidence. The officer does not contradict the location. The officer reframes the encounter. Commands replace questions. Authority is asserted without foundation. Each command functions as a legal predicate that the footage does not support. This decision could not be undone. A third decision point occurs when the officer directs the veteran to comply with physical positioning. The instruction implies detention. Under constitutional analysis, later referenced in filings, A reasonable person would not feel free to leave. The seizure is complete. No offense has been recorded. The legal exposure increases. The camera angle remains unchanged. There is no cut. No external trigger appears. The veteran complies. He shifts position on his own lawn. His compliance does not produce de-escalation. Instead, the officer's posture hardens. The legitimacy gap widens further. Another decision follows. The officer escalates from detention to restraint. This choice eliminates discretionary retreat. Once restraints are applied, the arrest is operational regardless of subsequent explanation. What followed was procedural, not discretionary. Throughout this sequence, authority reversal remains constant. The veteran's background, service under lawful command, adherence to structured rules, stands in contrast to the absence of lawful cause on scene. The footage does not need to state his history. The record later confirms it. The contrast exists in the mismatch between conduct and response. The officer attempts to justify the restraint verbally. The camera does not capture a qualifying offense. No citation is issued on scene that would later appear in the record as probable cause. The explanation does not close the legitimacy gap. The outcome narrowed again. A further decision point arises when the officer declines to reassess. At this stage, disengagement remains possible. Release remains possible. The officer chooses neither. The choice converts potential error into documented action. This decision could not be undone. The environment remains unchanged. No bystanders intervene. No supervisor appears in frame. The absence of interruption allows the sequence to continue uncorrected. Institutional silence begins here, though it is not yet named. Another decision follows. Transport. The veteran is moved from the property. The removal from home transforms the incident into a custodial arrest. Each minute that follows compounds exposure. Time becomes a factor in later review. Authority reversal echoes again. The veteran, trained to submit to lawful orders, submits to orders not supported by visible cause. The officer, empowered to enforce law within limits, exceeds them, as recorded. The gap between perception and legal reality widens to a measurable distance. The camera records compliance, not resistance. This detail becomes critical in later analysis. A lack of resistance eliminates a common justification for force. The officer proceeds regardless. The decision narrows the path to resolution. Another decision point occurs during custody. The officer maintains the arrest despite no new information. Each opportunity to reassess is declined. Each decline locks the sequence further. From this point, reversal becomes unlikely. The veteran's status is not debated on scene. It does not need to be. His lawful presence is sufficient. The footage confirms location and behavior. The law requires cause. The camera records none. As the encounter concludes, the legal reality diverges completely from the officer's perception. The officer's actions are now fixed in time. The record is created. The authority that initiated the arrest no longer controls the narrative. Evidence does. What follows is not argument, it is review. The decisions taken on the lawn carry forward into filings, evaluations, and ultimately, settlement. Each decision removed a safeguard. Each removal increased liability. The path was set. The focus shifts away from the lawn and toward the structure that absorbs what happened there. Once the arrest is completed, the encounter no longer belongs to the officer alone. It enters an institutional pipeline designed to document, preserve, and evaluate conduct after the fact. The first transition is administrative. The arrest generates records, timestamps, location data, custody logs. None of these instruments ask why a decision was made. They record only that it was. At this stage, the system does not correct behavior. It preserves it. A new decision point occurs immediately after intake. The arrest is processed rather than questioned. No corrective review interrupts the sequence. The absence of intervention matters. From this point, the outcome narrowed. Supervisory mechanisms exist, but they activate passively. According to public descriptions later referenced in filings, Review processes are triggered by documentation, not intuition. If the paperwork appears procedurally complete, escalation continues downstream. This decision could not be undone. The veteran's lawful status does not disappear inside the system. It becomes more visible. Military service appears in background checks. Residence information confirms private property. None of these facts contradict the footage. They reinforce it. Authority reversal deepens as institutional records align with what the camera already showed. Another decision point emerges within internal channels. The arrest is categorized without immediate challenge. The classification allows the case to move forward as routine. Routine processing removes urgency. What followed was procedural, not discretionary. At this stage, individual perception gives way to departmental momentum. No single actor is required to reassess legality unless prompted. The system assumes validity unless flagged. The decision not to flag closes another exit. The footage remains unchanged. It does not gain context. It does not lose clarity. The institution's role is not to reinterpret the video, but to store it. The consequence of storage without review is delay. Delay increases exposure. A further decision point arises when no immediate release is ordered. The veteran remains subject to custodial procedures. Each hour logged becomes part of the record. Each entry compounds the legal footprint of the arrest. The outcome narrowed again. Institutional silence is not absence. It is continuity. The lack of interruption allows the original decision to propagate through layers of bureaucracy. Intake leads to classification. Classification leads to retention. Retention leads to later scrutiny under less forgiving conditions. Authority reversal continues in parallel. The veteran's background, structured obedience, lawful engagement, compliance under command, aligns with institutional expectations. The officer's conduct, as recorded, does not. The system now holds both narratives in the same file. Another decision point occurs when the footage is preserved without annotation. No immediate notation questions probable cause. The record remains neutral in tone. Neutrality, in this context, favors continuation. This decision could not be undone. As days pass, the case moves from operational handling to legal awareness. Counsel becomes involved. At this point, the institution no longer controls the environment. The standard changes. Decisions are measured against statutes and precedent rather than field discretion. The absence of cause visible on camera becomes central. Under review, silence on justification is not neutral. It is conspicuous. The veteran's presence at home is not contested. The lack of an offense becomes a focal point. Another decision point emerges when the institution elects to respond through legal channels rather than internal resolution. The choice acknowledges exposure without admitting fault. This decision narrows available outcomes. The system now faces its own documentation. The footage does not adapt to explanation. The records do not supply missing justification. The narrative is fixed. Authority has shifted away from the initiating officer entirely. Institutional actors prepare for consequence management rather than correction. This transition marks a collapse of discretionary authority. What remains is risk mitigation. The path forward is constrained. By the time the case reaches formal evaluation, the original scene has lost relevance as an event and gained significance as evidence. The lawn is no longer a location. It is an exhibit. The arrest is no longer an action. It is a liability vector. The institution did not create the footage. It inherited it. And once inherited, the system cannot argue with what it shows. It can only respond. By the time the footage is examined beyond the field level, all discretionary exits have already closed. The escalation did not occur in a single moment. It unfolded through a sequence of decisions that, taken together, removed every lawful off-ramp. The first collapse point appears in hindsight, not on scene. Under constitutional review standards later applied, the absence of reasonable suspicion at the initial contact becomes determinative. The camera shows no triggering conduct. The officer's choice to continue engagement converts neutrality into exposure. From this point, the outcome narrowed. A subsequent decision amplifies the collapse. The detention is treated as justified without articulation. In legal analysis, silence is not neutral. It functions as a void where cause should exist. The decision to proceed without filling that void eliminates post hoc justification. This decision could not be undone. The escalation intensifies when restraint is applied. Restraint transforms the encounter from investigatory to custodial. At that moment, the standard shifts decisively to probable cause. The footage does not supply it. The act of restraint locks the sequence into constitutional scrutiny. What followed was procedural, not discretionary. Each additional action compounds the problem. Transport from the property is not merely logistical, it removes the context that might otherwise mitigate the encounter. The veteran is no longer framed by his home, he is framed by custody. The system now treats him as a subject rather than a resident. The outcome narrowed again. The collapse accelerates as time passes. Every minute in custody adds weight to the record. The absence of resistance remains constant. The absence of threat remains constant. The officer's authority, once exercised, cannot retract itself without acknowledgement of error. That acknowledgement does not occur. Another decision point emerges when no supervisory override interrupts the process. The footage moves upward without commentary. Silence functions as consent. The chain of command absorbs the arrest as valid by default. This decision could not be undone. At this stage, escalation is no longer driven by action. It is driven by inertia. The system continues because it has already begun. Each procedural step presumes the validity of the last. The collapse is structural. Authority reversal sharpens here. The veteran's background, service under lawful command, compliance with rules of engagement, aligns precisely with the standards now being violated. The officer's authority, intended to enforce law within constraints, operates outside those constraints as recorded. The contrast is no longer symbolic, it is evidentiary. Another collapse point occurs when the lack of cause is not remedied through release. Release remains possible. The decision not to release converts exposure into inevitability. The longer the custody persists, the narrower the institution's options become. The camera captures a slowing of movement. The physical pace of the encounter diminishes, but the legal velocity increases. Each quiet moment adds clarity rather than ambiguity. The absence of urgency undermines any claim of necessity. The outcome narrowed further. As review intensifies, the escalation becomes irreversible. The footage is no longer interpreted through officer perception. It is measured against legal thresholds. Those thresholds are static. The video does not evolve to meet them. The final collapse point occurs when the institution recognizes that explanation cannot repair the gap. At this stage, justification is no longer sought. Exposure is acknowledged internally, though not publicly. The decision shifts from defense to containment. This decision could not be undone. Then the scene stills. The veteran stands motionless. The officer's posture freezes. Commands stop. Movement slows. No one speaks. The camera records silence where authority once filled the space. Nothing changes in the frame. Nothing needs to. When motion resumes, the collapse is complete. The encounter has crossed from action into record. The power dynamic has inverted. The officer's discretion has expired. The evidence now dictates the future. The escalation ends not with confrontation, but with finality. The system cannot unwind the sequence without confronting what the camera shows. Every lawful exit has already been bypassed. What remains is consequence. Control transfers decisively from the scene to the record. The footage becomes the primary authority. Time compresses as reviewers move backward and forward through the same moments, isolating decisions and measuring them against fixed legal thresholds. What the camera captured does not change, interpretation does. The review begins with timestamps, entry onto the property, initial contact, the absence of a precipitating event. Each segment is examined in sequence. The order matters. Under later analysis, referenced in filings, reasonable suspicion must precede detention. The footage places detention before any qualifying conduct. From this point, the outcome narrowed. A decision point emerges within the review itself. Analysts elect to assess the encounter frame by frame, rather than rely on narrative summaries. This choice removes ambiguity. The camera shows hands visible. It shows distance maintained. It shows compliance. The decision to rely on primary evidence rather than recollection closes an interpretive exit. This decision could not be undone. Attention shifts to verbal exchanges. Commands are issued. Justifications are not. The absence of articulated cause becomes conspicuous. In review, silence is not neutral. It is evidence of omission. What followed was procedural, not discretionary. Another decision point occurs when the footage is synchronized with documentation. Arrest records, custody logs, and timestamps align with the video. No discrepancy supplies a missing predicate. The record corroborates the camera rather than supplements it. The outcome narrowed again. The veteran's lawful presence is confirmed independently. Property records establish residence. Background checks confirm military service. These facts do not add drama. They add context. Authority reversal deepens as lawful status aligns across systems while cause remains absent. Reviewers pause and replay. Movement slows. The moment where restraint is applied is examined repeatedly. The standard at that moment is probable cause. The footage does not provide it. The decision to restrain is now fixed against an unchanging legal measure. This decision could not be undone. Another decision point follows when the review expands beyond the initial arrest to subsequent handling, duration of custody, lack of intervening offense, continued detention without new information. Each segment increases exposure. The cumulative effect matters. The review process narrows its focus. Peripheral issues fall away. What remains is the core question: whether the arrest was supported at the moment it occurred. The camera answers by omission. No cause appears. The answer is structural. At this stage, silence returns, not on the scene, but in analysis. Reviewers note what is not present. No sudden threat. No escalation by the veteran. No emergent circumstance. The stillness recorded earlier now functions as evidence of non-necessity. A further decision point arises when the institution elects not to pursue internal justification narratives. The footage resists reinterpretation. Attempts to contextualize fail to supply missing elements. The choice to abandon narrative defense shifts strategy. This decision could not be undone. The review transitions into exposure management. Legal counsel evaluates risk. Numbers enter the discussion. Timeframes are considered. The question is no longer whether the arrest can be defended, but how its consequences will be resolved. Micro-payoffs accumulate. Footage confirms location. Records confirm custody. Timelines confirm duration. Each confirmation removes uncertainty. The authority that once controlled the scene now responds to a fixed evidentiary set. The silence moment returns implicitly. No analysis is required to see what is missing. The absence of cause is the dominant feature. The veteran's compliance remains uninterrupted throughout the record. The system confronts its own documentation. The review concludes with a narrowed set of options. Litigation exposure is quantified. Reputational impact is assessed. The path forward becomes limited and predictable. The camera has already decided the range of outcomes. The transfer of power is complete. The officer's actions are no longer evaluated in isolation. They are embedded in a record that cannot be altered. The institution prepares for resolution, not rebuttal. What follows is not debate. It is consequence, measured and final. The resolution arrives through documentation rather than announcement. Dates replace dialogue. Figures replace argument. The legal consequence unfolds along a predictable track once exposure is quantified and defenses are exhausted. Public records later reflect that the matter did not proceed to trial. Instead, the city agreed to a monetary resolution totaling $1.1 million. The settlement is recorded as a civil payout. As is standard in such agreements, it does not include an admission of liability. That absence does not alter the sequence that produced it. The number stands as the outcome. A decision point precedes the agreement. Legal counsel evaluates the footage against governing standards. The assessment focuses on the moment of arrest. Probable cause is required at that moment. The camera does not supply it. The decision to settle rather than litigate narrows options to closure. This decision could not be undone. The timing matters. The payout follows months of review and negotiation. During that period, the evidentiary record remains static. No new information emerges to support the arrest. The absence of cause persists. The outcome narrows further as time passes without corrective findings. Another decision point occurs when the city authorizes settlement funds. Authorization converts analysis into action. Budgetary approval acknowledges risk in quantifiable terms. The amount reflects anticipated exposure, not sentiment. What followed was procedural, not discretionary. The structure of the payout is formalized. Disbursement schedules are set. Releases are drafted. The veteran's claim resolves without a verdict. The legal system closes the matter through agreement rather than judgment. The closure is permanent. The officer's role concludes within the record. The settlement addresses the incident, not character. No motive is assigned. No intent is adjudicated. The resolution concerns conduct as documented. Authority reversal completes its arc here. The power to define the outcome has fully shifted away from the scene. Another decision point appears in the aftermath of payment. The city elects not to pursue further action through appellate channels. Settlement forecloses appeal. The choice prioritizes finality. This decision could not be undone. The $1.1 million figure becomes the definitive reference point. It appears in summaries and disclosures. It anchors the incident in financial reality. The number does not argue, it concludes. The veteran's status is reflected indirectly. The resolution compensates without disputing lawful presence. The record affirms that the encounter occurred at home. The absence of cause remains unchallenged. The legal consequence addresses harm without expanding narrative. Institutional language frames the outcome as risk management. Terms such as resolution and closure replace field-level vocabulary. The system speaks in neutral phrases. The effect is the same. The matter is closed. Another decision point follows when the case file is archived. Archival does not erase. It preserves. The footage remains accessible for training, oversight, and future reference. The decision to retain rather than discard embeds the incident within institutional memory. The consequence is irreversible. Funds disbursed cannot be reclaimed. Time cannot be rewound. The arrest remains recorded. The review remains concluded. The legal system marks the end of proceedings without reopening the facts. What the settlement does not do is change the footage. The video remains as it was recorded. The sequence remains intact. The absence of cause remains visible. The resolution acknowledges that reality without contest. The finality is procedural. No public hearing follows. No jury deliberates. The case exits the system through agreement. The authority that once acted now yields to closure. The legal consequence completes the chain that began on the lawn. The camera initiated it. Decisions compounded it. Review confirmed it. Payment ends it. From this point forward, the incident exists only as record, reference, and consequence. There is nothing left to decide. After the settlement is finalized, the incident no longer functions as a dispute. It becomes a reference point. The system shifts from resolution to incorporation, absorbing what occurred into policy, training, and oversight structures without commentary. Internal materials are updated. Encounter protocols emphasize articulation requirements at the earliest stage of contact. The standard is not new. What changes is enforcement. Documentation now foregrounds the moment where cause must be established, not assumed. The footage makes the requirement unavoidable. A decision point follows at the institutional level. Training curricula are revised to include scenario review drawn from recorded encounters. The selection is deliberate. Incidents with clear evidentiary gaps are prioritized. This decision narrows discretion by design. It cannot be undone. Oversight mechanisms adjust cadence. Reviews that once occurred downstream are moved closer to intake. The intent is procedural, not corrective. Earlier review limits exposure. The system responds to risk, not emotion. What followed was procedural, not discretionary. Policy language tightens. Definitions of detention and arrest are clarified in operational terms. The threshold between conversation and seizure is re-emphasized. The footage's stillness, hands visible, posture compliant, no precipitating act, becomes illustrative rather than anecdotal. The standard is rendered concrete. Another decision point emerges when the incident is retained for audit purposes. Retention ensures accessibility. Accessibility ensures recurrence in oversight cycles. The decision embeds permanence. This decision could not be undone. The settlement figure continues to circulate internally as a metric, not as a warning, but as a data point. Exposure is quantified. Budgetary planning incorporates precedent. The system recalibrates without narrative. External communication remains limited. Public statements, where issued, adhere to neutral language. No motive is assigned. No character judgment is made. The outcome is framed as closure. The restraint mirrors the record. The footage persists. It does not age out of relevance. Its value is structural. It demonstrates how lawful exits disappear through sequence rather than intent. The lesson is procedural inevitability. Another decision point occurs when compliance audits reference the incident indirectly. Criteria are adjusted. Supervisory sign-offs require explicit cause articulation. Silence is no longer sufficient. The change is mechanical. The authority reversal that defined the incident completes its final transition here. Power no longer rests with the initiating action. It rests with documented standards enforced after the fact. The system responds to what the camera made undeniable. The aftermath does not seek redemption. It seeks alignment. Policy aligns with law. Training aligns with evidence. Oversight aligns with consequence. The adjustment is quiet and permanent. The incident closes without ceremony. It remains present as structure. The lawn is no longer a location. It is a benchmark. The arrest is no longer an action. It is a case study. Footage did not provoke outrage. It imposed clarity. And clarity, once recorded, leaves no room for discretion.